Hello everyone and welcome back to English with Lucy. I've got a great video planned for you today. We are going to be comparing British English with American English and Canadian English. And I have two fabulous guests on my channel and I think you might recognize them.
Hey, my name is Rachel. I'm from the US and I have a channel here on YouTube where I focus on all things spoken English with an American accent. My accent is what I would call a standard American accent. I grew up in Florida. I went to school in the Midwest. And since then, I've lived in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia.
So we have Rachel representing the US and representing Canada, we have Bob the Canadian.
Well, hello Lucy and hello Rachel and hello to all of Lucy's viewers. I'm Bob the Canadian from the YouTube channel Learn English with Bob the Canadian, where you'll often find me out somewhere on my farm teaching a short English lesson.
If you haven't met me before, my name's Lucy. I run this channel, English with Lucy, and I am from Cambridgeshire in the United Kingdom, and I speak with a modern RP accent. I'd just like to remind you that there's a free PDF that goes with this lesson. It's got everything that we're going to talk about today, plus a quiz at the end. If you'd like to download the free PDF, all you've got to do is click on the link in the description box, enter your name and your email address. You then sign up to my mailing list and the PDF will arrive automatically in your inbox. From then on, you don't have to subscribe again. Every week you'll receive all of my lesson PDFs plus all of my news and offers. By the way, this is a two-part video. Today we are looking at vocabulary, and in the future there will be a part 2 with pronunciation, where we will definitively find out if Canadians say a boot or not. Okay, so I have sent Bob and Rachel a list of pictures and they are going to tell us how they say it where they're from, because there are going to be some differences. Let's get started with this first one.
This first one is definitely the letter Z, although as a child we watched the American version of Sesame Street and they tried to get me to learn it as the letter Z, but this in Canada is definitely the letter Z, X, Y, Z.
I would definitely call this letter Z.
Interesting. For me in the UK, in British English, it is the letter Z as well. I really relate to Bob on that one because we used to watch loads of TV shows and cartoons that were produced in the US and they always used to say Z as well, and I remember finding it quite confusing, but yeah, X, Y, Z over here. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. What would they call this?
So this is definitely a bill in Canadian English. When you're at a restaurant and when you're done eating, you ask your server if you can have the bill.
The check is the most common, but I would also call this the bill.
In the UK, this is always the bill. Can I have the bill? And funny story, I worked as a waitress when I was a teenager and someone once said to me, can I have the bill? But I misread their lips and I thought they said, can I have some milk? And I brought them a glass of milk and they were just so confused. Okay, on to the third. What would you call this? And remember that you can write in the comment section below what you would call these as well if you say something different.
So we call these either running shoes or runners in Canadian English. If you're going to go out for a walk or a run, you put on your running shoes or you put on your runners.
There are lots of different terms I might use for this. Tennis shoes or running shoes, even though they might not specifically be for tennis or running. Also sneakers.
Interesting. We don't use any of those words in the UK. We understand them. Sneakers, running shoes, tennis shoes. But I would say that running shoes would be specifically for running. In general, we call these shoes trainers. Trainers. Okay, on to the next.
A long time ago in Canadian English, we called this a Chesterfield, but now we just call it a couch. Sometimes we might say sofa, but usually when we see something like this, we say, I'm gonna go sit on the couch.
I would call this either a couch or a sofa.
Funny, okay, so we would hardly ever call this a couch. That sounds very American and Canadian to me. We would almost always call this a sofa or sometimes a settee. A Chesterfield to me seems like an old-fashioned leather sofa. It's a specific design. We do have a lot of Americanisms in British English, and we would say a couch potato, not a sofa potato. That doesn't work. If someone's lazy, they're a couch potato, so we have adopted that. Okay, on to the next one.
The $1 coin in Canada has a loonie on it. That's a bird that lives in northern Canada. So we decided we would just call this the loonie. Then when we decided to have a $2 coin, we thought we would call it a toonie because it's worth $2 and it rhymes with loonie.
Slang for $1, a buck.
I love the loonie and then the toonie. I think that's absolutely hilarious. Yeah, I've heard of buck before. So we don't have dollars in the UK, we have pounds. And our slang term for £1 is a quid. And we haven't thought of a cool name for two. We call it 2 quid. 1 quid, 2 quid. Another thing to note is when we have £5 or 5 quid, we'll call it a fiver. And for 10, a tenner.
In Canada, we would call this pop. I think it's the second half of the word soda pop. I think my American cousins use the first part of the word. I think they call it soda, but we just call it pop.
Actually, in the US, we use either soda or pop, depending on the region. I personally use soda.
Interesting. Okay, so there are definitely some clear similarities between those two, unsurprisingly. In the UK, it's very different. You will find some people, I think more up north, saying pop. But in general, we call it fizzy drinks, which doesn't sound as cool. Now, the word soda to us is quite confusing because a soda for us is fizzy water. So I remember going over to the US and I was offered a soda and I thought, oh, how boring. No, I'll have something more interesting like a Coke, please. Okay, on to the next one.
In Canada, we use the metric system, so we measure distance in kilometers, but that seems like a really big word, so sometimes we just say clicks. If you ask someone, how do I get to Niagara Falls? They might say, oh, it's about 40 clicks from here. Sometimes it's spelled with a C, sometimes with a K.
I would call that 1 kilometer, but of course, in the US, we're much more familiar with miles.
So we're quite boring here. We would just call it a kilometre. But sometimes when we're running or doing sport, we will just shorten that down to K. So I love running and I like to run 5K and 10K, 5 kilometres, 10 kilometres. I've never heard of click before. That's quite cool. For driving, we do still tend to use miles. Our speed is in miles per hour. How weird is that? I go running in kilometres, but I drive in miles. We need to sort that out. All right, let's talk about this one. This is what I actually celebrated this weekend that's just gone past.
In Canadian English, we would call this either a stag and doe or a Jack and Jill. It's a party that a couple has about a month or two before their actual wedding, where they just invite friends and family over just to have a good time to celebrate the fact that they're getting married.
That would be a bachelor party for a man, a bachelorette party for a woman.
Ah, it's completely different. In the UK, we say hen do. A do is a party, or a stag do. Now it's more common for them to be more than one night. People like to go away for weekends. But if it's just one night, you can say hen night or stag night as well. Also, it's not so common to celebrate them together, as Bob explained, but it is becoming more common. And we put stag and hen together and we call it a sten. Hag didn't sound so good. Okay, this next one is an interesting one and I kind of just put it in for Bob. Let's see what he says.
Canadians often add the word a to the end of a sentence to turn it into a question. So I can't really explain how it works, but I'll give you a few examples. I could say, it's a nice day out here, eh? Or I could say, it's getting hot out here, eh? Or if it was getting a bit windy, I could say, it's getting windy out here, eh? All of those would be examples of how Canadians use the word a.
A common question tag in the US would be, right?
Yes, I just wanted to hear Bob say a. I know it's a common stereotype that, well, there's two that I've heard of Canada, that they say a boot. In British English, we do use a sometimes, a. Or isn't it or doesn't it? We do say a lot, oh, it's hot, isn't it? Sometimes we can shorten this down to in it. It's hot, isn't it? Oh my God, in it. Doesn't it can go to done it. It hurts, done it. I've heard them say right a lot in American English. That's definitely creeping into British English. because we just consume so much American media.
So Canada is a pretty big country, and in different parts, I think they have different words for this. We call them smokes. In some parts of Canada, they might call them darts, but most people, I think, just call them cigarettes.
I don't smoke, so I'm not super familiar here, but I would say cigarettes, or for shorter or for slang, ciggies or smokes.
So smokes sounds very, very like American gangster film to me. In British English, cigarettes or ciggies. We also use the word fag, which if you use it to describe a person, it's a really offensive word, but it's a common slang term for cigarettes. Okay, on to the next. What do you call this?
So these are what we call freezies. You buy them in the store and they're not frozen. When you come home, you put them in the freezer, and in a couple days they're frozen, and then on a hot day, kids can take them out, snip the end off with a pair of scissors, and eat it to cool off.
I'd call this a popsicle.
Okay, so yeah, we'd definitely call in British English this a popsicle, but we would also call it a lolly. Any kind of frozen treat that isn't creamy, we'd call a lolly. If it's creamy, it's an ice cream.
So in Canada, we would call this homo milk or whole milk. Homo is short for homogenized. I think they mix the milk and the cream together so it won't separate anymore. So this in Canada would be either homo milk or whole milk.
That would be whole milk.
Ah, okay. So if someone asked me for homo milk, I would not know what they're talking about. I would understand whole milk, but in the UK we tend to call it full fat milk or full cream milk. Anything with the fat removed is skimmed or semi-skimmed, which is half and half. Also, I forgot to ask Bob if it's true that his milk comes in bags. I've heard that in Canada, milk comes in bags. Okay, next one. What are they going to call this?
So we would call this either a parking garage or a parkade. When you go to see a show in a city like Toronto, you park your car in a parking garage or in a parkade.
I would call this a parking garage.
For me, this is a multi-story car park. We do have a habit of overcomplicating things. Yeah, one thing I've noticed is that in the US, they call it a parking lot. We always call this a car park. And if it has multiple levels, it's a multi-story car park. I would definitely understand parking garage, or garage as we would call it. But if someone said parkade, I would think that might be like a mix between a park and an arcade, which sounds so fun. And I would be so bitterly disappointed when I get there and it's a multi-story car park. All right, on to the next one. What do you call this?
So we would call this a washroom in Canada. I still remember one of my first visits to the US when I asked someone if I could use their washroom, and they looked at me funny because I think they call it a bathroom there. But in Canada, this is definitely a washroom.
I would call this a bathroom, or we would also say restroom.
Interesting. In British English, we'd understand washroom and restroom and bathroom, of course, but we tend to call it the loo or just simply the toilet. Bathroom, to me, implies that it has a bath and a shower. So a public bathroom, well, I don't want to have a shower or a bath in a public bath. You will often see toilets or public restrooms in the UK marked with WC. This is short for water closet, but no one ever says water closet. We always say the loo or the toilets. Where are the toilets? Where's the toilet? Some of my friends from across the pond have said that they find saying the word toilet directly quite vulgar, and I do understand that, but it's just so ingrained into our everyday speech. Right, let's take a look at this next one. What do they say?
We would call this either a fire hall or a fire station. The fire hall is the place where you would find firefighters and fire trucks, and if there's a fire, the alarm goes off and they jump in their trucks and they go to put out the fire. So we would call it a fire hall or a fire station.
Fire station, but also firehouse.
Interesting. For us, this is just a fire station. We never ever say fire hall or, what was the other one? Firehouse. No, we never say that. Fire station. Actually, I've just thought there's a bar in London called the Chiltern Firehouse, which is meant to be very nice. Actually, it is very nice. I've been there. And yeah, I never even thought twice about that. Maybe we do say firehouse every now and again. All right, on to the next one. What do they say for this?
In Canada, we often refer to electricity as hydro. Sometimes there's a storm and the hydro goes out. the poles along the road are called hydro poles. So I think this is because a lot of our electricity comes from hydroelectric power plants, but in Canada, you call electricity hydro.
We call that electricity.
Interesting. Because if you said the hydro wasn't working, I would presume that was your water supply. In British English, we call this electricity, the electric. We also say the power, so we have a power cut or the power's gone out, or energy. You know, my energy bill's gone up so much. This is because we use lots of different sources. There's gas in many houses. Oil is what we use here. It depends if you're on the mains supply or not. Okay, what do they call this?
So we would call this either brown bread or whole wheat bread. It's more common for me as an older Canadian to call it brown bread. I think for my kids they would call this whole wheat bread, but definitely when I was growing up we had white bread and we had brown bread.
I would call that whole wheat bread.
I'm definitely seeing more similarities between Canadian English and British English than American English and British English. We also call this brown bread. Multigrain and whole wheat is also creeping in, but in general we have brown bread, white bread. Okay. What do they say for this one?
Sometimes when you're at a restaurant, you get a little bit of food on your mouth and you use a serviette to wipe it off. So this is what we in Canada would call a serviette.
That's a paper napkin.
Ah, interesting. In British English, we use both. Serviette and napkin. For me, a serviette seems like a kind of cheaper white one that's disposable, and a napkin is either decorated or made of material. Right, let's see what they say for this one.
We call a case of beer with 24 bottles in it a 2-4 in Canada. Do you get it? There's 24 bottles of beer in it, 2-4. So we call a case of beer with 24 bottles of beer in it a 2-4.
We would call that a case of beer.
In British English, we would call this a 24 pack. If someone asked me for a 2-4, I don't think I'd know what they're talking about, but I like that. That's very efficient. Right, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much to Bob and Rachel for their fantastic explanations and for generously participating in this video. I've left all of their information down below in the description box. You can also click on the link there to get your free PDF for today's lesson. Don't forget to connect with me on all of my social media. I've got my Instagram and I've got my website, englishwithlucy.co.uk, where I've got a really cool pronunciation tool. You can click on all the phonemes and hear how words are pronounced in British English. E, no, air. If you're looking for more listening practice and to expand your vocabulary, then I also have my vlogging channel where I document my life here on a farm in the English countryside. All of the vlogs are fully subtitled for your convenience, so you can pick up lots of vocab and improve your listening. I will see you soon for another lesson. Mwah!